much for coming out this morning on a cold day. First, I'd like to introduce some of our dignitaries we have here today. First, Mayor Jason Scott in the back there. Councilman Jim Steiner from the 4th District. And also our current chief, Chief George Johnstone, the 13th chief. And before we get started, I'd like to thank the board of the Corona Historic Preservation Society. Let's just stand really quick. Eric Bergreen. Mary Wynn. So first, a little background. This is CHPS's 6th panel discussion that we've had. We started off with life in Corona in the 40s, into the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and I refused to do the 80s because I grew up here in the 80s. A little bit of self-preservation. So we decided 2 years ago to look at doing public safety. Got really excited, went in a bunch of different ways. We did the history of the Corona Fire Department last year, and this year I'm very pleased to do the history of the Corona Police Department. We had a fantastic couple of people that were working on this. We brought in Terry Madory. He's the Corona PD Historian. I check in with Terry quite a bit for things. And Karen Alexander really helped pull this together from the bootstraps. So thank you, Karen, very much. So just as a reminder, all of this is on YouTube. We have videoed all of these for posterity just because I think it's really good to be able to go back and watch these with people that couldn't be here, and for you guys to go back and critique your performances. So first, let me introduce the panel. We have Captain Roy Vanderhelm, Captain John Dizell, Captain Ray Coda, Captain Sam Spiegel, our newest retired captain, our chief. Sorry, Chief. You're good. Mike Abel. Richard Gonzalez. And Chief John Claiborne. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Terry to start us off. He's going to take over and be the moderator. Please give a round of applause for Terry.
Good morning. Welcome to the symposium. Welcome to the symposium on the history, the brief history of the Corona Police Department. From its very beginnings as a one-cop town into becoming a modern law enforcement organization. I see quite a few past and present Corona police officers. And of course, that accounts for decades of experiences and personal stories, just like the ones you'll hear from these panelists today. To explain my presence here, I became a police officer here in Corona almost 29 years ago. And during my time, I began to collect stories and personal experiences from retired police officers and veteran officers and citizens infected memorabilia along the way. So I really wanted to know where our roots started from and how we got to this place. And kind of by osmosis, I became the historian for the police department. It was never an official thing. So let me take you back to when we started as a law enforcement organization, 133 years ago. Right around this spot, R.B. Taylor and his investors purchased 5,000 acres on this sloping part of the valley. Within a few months, and of course they planned it out with commercial lots and residential lots, and within a few months, there was 1,500 residents here. Now, we've always been a very diverse city from the very, very beginning. Methodist and Baptist townspeople and growers were intermingled with Mexican and Native American labor. Now, we were more or less a segregated city in those times. The prominent families of the town, they all lived on the south side of 6th Street and then around the circle. If you were Hispanic or an ethnic minority, you lived north of 4th Street. And of course, east of Main and north of 4th Street was a section called the Mexican Quarter. I just want to kind of lay out things the way the city looked back then. So in 1887, the sheriff of San Bernardino, we were San Bernardino County, we were known as the city of South Riverside. He appointed a constable, and on the recommendation of R.B. Taylor, Thomas Blades was appointed our constable of this township and the neighboring township of Temescal, which is now El Cerrito. Now he was an interesting man. He was from Great Britain, immigrated here in 1879, and he is responsible for assisting with the first jury trial in town. There was a complaint sworn against Dixon Cooley. He was an amateur prize fighter who hit another man with a brick. Swore out a complaint. So Justice LaFawn from Temescal Township asked him to assemble a jury. He did so by going door to door downtown and asking the business people, the men of the town who ran businesses, if they were available to serve on the jury. So within a couple of hours, he was able to assemble his jury of 9 men, and the following day they had their trial. Now this was at 102 South Main Street at the residence of James Wilson. Now the reason for that was his house was almost finished, and it had a room large enough to hold a jury trial. That's just to let you know how developed we are in infrastructure. So and it just so happens that he was the first African-American resident of the town. Now, we've had, between 1887 and 1896, we've had 6 constables, and some only served 3 months. Constable Lawson only served 3 months and quit, because he himself was kind of getting in trouble with the law. Constable Colburn became a city trustee, and then was appointed deputy sheriff. That's how he became a deputy back then, the sheriff appointed you. And then he became the 3rd sheriff of Riverside. And then lastly, Constable Robinson, he became our first town marshal in 1896. Now in 1896, we weren't South Corona anymore. We weren't South Riverside anymore. We incorporated as a city, and we named ourselves Corona. We wanted to kind of not identify with the city of Riverside so much and become our own town. So we had town marshals then, and at first it was an office that we ran for, and the city normally had 2 people running for the office of marshal, a Republican and a Democrat. And it was kind of a hotly contested thing. There was this bit of rivalry or trying to political control over the office of the marshal, and the reason for that is there was agendas on what the city trustees wanted done using their city marshal. Now, during this time that we had the marshals from 1896 through 1914, This was truly, in most respects, a Wild West town. During this time, we had shootouts, stabbings, drinking, prostitution, we had horse thievery, cattle wrestling, we've had jumping and mining claims, bootlegging, and we even had a few jailbreaks. They couldn't have wrote this, a Hollywood scriptwriter couldn't have wrote it better. So let me go to 1897. We have a deputy marshal named Jack Mickinson, and he investigates Corona's first prosecutable murder. And I mean that we had plenty of murders before then, but we didn't know who did it. This is one where we actually had somebody in custody. So what happened was, he arrested Fred Hazen at his home on the 100 block of North Ramona. He shot his friend during a drunken fight. He had shot him with a rifle. And so they brought him to trial, and he was exonerated because there was no witness to it. And that was our first trial. Now, we didn't have a jail, per se, until 1899. Prior to this time, if you were arrested by the Marshal, you were either fined on the spot, or you were taken to Riverside City Jail, or you were taken over to Temescal to talk to the judge. So in 1899, we received some money from the the county supervisor, and we built a 10 by 10 plank jail behind the water office at 707 South Main Street. Now, unfortunately, because it was made out of plank, we had several breakouts by kicking out the boards. And one person tried to set it on fire with a mattress so it could get out. And that didn't work very well. But by 1908, we ordered a better jail. This was a 7 by 10 steel-plated jail. We ordered it from San Francisco Iron Works. They shipped it down here. And it would keep 4 people, and it had a little wood stove. Also, people tried to set that on fire as well. And then in 1912, when the City Hall was built, we continued to use that jail, but it was put on a wagon, and they would take it to the north side of the city, perhaps the Mexican Quarter, on Saturday nights, and then they would put the drunks in there and keep them there overnight. Now, we had this jail for years and years. It just recently disappeared. Nobody seems to know what happened to it. But it stayed here for many years. It stayed behind the police department and after the rifle range. It had a lot of bullet holes in it. You never knew the story on how it got all those bullet holes. But unfortunately, it's gone. So the City Hall was built in 1912, and we eventually had 4 cells in there. They were made out of pressed brick. The steel bars were made here locally in town on the blacksmith. Marshal Robinson was called to the jail one night, like I said, because he heard screams, and somebody had set the fire with the stove inside the jail. And he rescued that person, but he was somewhat brave. So now I'm going to get to kind of the most prolific tale in the city involving law enforcement, and that's Grant C. Alexander. Grant C. Alexander was a police chief in Chadron, Nebraska in 1892. He was well liked there. But in 1894, he decided to move his family to Southern California for the better climate and better business opportunities. So by 1894, he's in town. He buys a new home at 512 South Howard Street. He opens a painting business. And it does fairly well. But he is one of the few law enforcement officers in the town. He still has that experience. So by 1910, he decides he's going to run on the Republican ticket for Marshal. And he's beat out by Wellman Leonard. But he doesn't give up. In 1912, he's back, and he's the deputy to Marshal Lane. He acts as his night watchman and sometimes his deputy in town. Now, they spend a lot of time going into businesses, trying to confiscate liquor, Liquor is the biggest deal at this time of the city's history. Many counties are leaning towards going to prohibition. The temperance movement is in full swing. And of course, the prominent people of this town want liquor to disappear from the city. So they draft some ordinances. And so Marshal Rainey and Grant Alexander spend most of their time arresting people for drinking, possession of wine, possession of beer, and so forth. So this kind of becomes unsustainable for Marshal Rainey. It's all they do. There's not enough manpower, and it's dangerous work. Almost all the time, they're involved in some sort of conflict, fight, or what have you, trying to make these arrests. So when the city trustees decide to draft further ordinances, he goes to the city trustees and says he's resigning. Now, they decide they're going to, before he leaves, he tells the city trustees, to the effect, you better pay the next marshal a lot more money, because you're not going to have to pay him very long. And he left. Well, they offered the job to Grant Alexander. And they did pay him a lot. They paid him the same amount as the city trustee or councilman, $75 a month, plus $2 for every arrest in violation of the liquor licenses. From the very first month, he was the highest paid city employee. And he stayed there throughout his tenure, averaging $150 to $175 a month. So he faithfully enforced the new city ordinances 147 and 245 regarding the limits on beer, wine, and liquor. And of course, these arrests were heavily applied on the north side of town. And he also, in the center of town, there was barber shops, billiard halls, cigar shops. And during that time, it was a custom to get your hair cut and for them to give you a cup of beer. Or to go to the cigar store and have a beer. It's just the way things were done. And so he spent quite a bit of time trying to stop that activity. So in the few weeks before his murder, Marshal Alexander had disarmed and arrested two men in the Mexican quarter for possession of firearms. He also arrested a dozen more for gambling, drinking, and fighting. By October of 1913, he was making arrests of smugglers at the train depot. He would wait for the train to come in from San Bernardino, and anybody coming in with a particularly large trunk or suitcase, he would stop and demand to search the suitcase. And he was very successful at this because he frequently found that they were smuggling liquor in from Olette Town into here on the train. And then what he would do is arrest them, 10 days in jail for possession of alcohol in the city limits. And he would put them in the jail here on Main Street. Now, there was one time he arrested two men who were smuggling liquor off the train, and during their 11-day sentence, he made them dig out the unimproved section of the cellar to make way for an additional jail cell. So they had hard labor on top of the living. So, so the week before his murder, he received an anonymous telephone call. He was told that he was slated for death. Now, there was an attempt on his life on the 19th of December, and there was a second unsuccessful attempt the following day. On the 22nd of December, 1913, at 12:30 a.m., the marshal was alerted to some yelling and screaming across the alley from his home at the Kuhl residence. In the back of that residence were a couple of shacks that were rented out to laborers on a regular basis. So he got dressed, put on his overcoat, put on his gun belt, and went across the alley and went to the shack. He demanded entry. He could still hear people yelling and screaming, but not responding to his demand. He forced his way in. And as soon as he did, at point blank range, he was shot twice. Once in the right lung and once in the neck. Now, he lingered for several minutes in a sitting position on the floor of that shack. Then he fell into a prone position and passed away. The next morning, Mrs. Kuehl, about 6:30 a.m., found him there on the floor. And the city was in complete panic. They had no idea why this happened, and nobody apparently heard the shots. Or if they did hear the shots, it was a common thing. All we had now was the deputy marshal, and truthfully, he didn't know what to do about it. So there was an emergency meeting of the city trustees, and they decided they needed to find somebody that has the ability to investigate a murder. So they contacted the Burns Detective Agency in Los Angeles, and they hired Albert C. Ramsey, a private detective, who was also a prior chief of the Venice Police Department and the Ocean Park Police Department. And he was an investigator for the County of Los Angeles, the District Attorney's Office. So he's well qualified. He accepted the $100 retainer. So during his investigation, he found out that the four suspects, Miguel Espinosa, Guadalupe Diaz, Eduardo, and Jose Seda, had planned the murder early December because the marshal had thrown them out of town as being undesirable. Well, within about a year, most of these suspects, as far as we know, were brought to justice. Some of it is a legend, but what we do know is that the Sages found their way, after the murder, they left out of town on the train. They hopped the train to go to Prado, which was just west of us where the dam is now. A few weeks later, they were found in Ludlow, San Bernardino, which is way high up in the high desert. And they had robbed somebody up there. Well, apparently we had gone up there, found them, and got in a gunfight with them. And both of them were killed. Now, Guadalupe Diaz was arrested by Riverside PD, and the fourth suspect, legend has it, died in a gunfight in Nogales. But we were never able to prove that. In 1914, there was a murder in the middle of the night at the packing house next to the tracks, just north of us here. 2 officers were sent to go down the tracks west of here to find the suspect. He was wanted for murder, and they caught up to him, roughly where Auto Center and the railroad tracks meet now. Late at night, they were using their newly issued electric torches, flashlights, when they ran into the suspect, Antonio Mori. They told him to throw his hands up, but instead he jerked a revolver from his coat. And 14 rounds were exchanged between the 3 of them. 8 of them made it into Mori, killing him. The other men, Officers Sherman and Ewing, were also hit. Officer Ewing was hit in the ankle, which caused him to drop to one knee, but he maintained shooting at the suspect. Officer Sherman was struck. A bullet went through his coat, hit his gun belt, and knocked the bullets out of the roofs. Otherwise, he was unharmed. They went to see Maury, who was laying on the ground. and found that he had in his coat 23 sticks of dynamite, blasting caps, and fuse cord. He was wanted in 3 counties because he was a safe, he blew safes to steal building and things like that. You gotta think it was divine intervention. So, the following Sunday, they buried Maury in the Pottersfield Low Sunny Slope Cemetery in North Ridge. Now, after the murder of Grant Alexander and after bringing the suspects to justice, they offered A.C. Ramsey the job of Marshal. They were very impressed with how he handled that. Now, on December 11th, even though he was doing an excellent job, the city trustees brought him into what they call an emergency session. They alluded that they had some problems with how he was handling business in town. The city clerk, Casey Turpin, asked him for his badge. Put his hand out, "You need your badge." You know, Marshal Ramsey was dismayed, but he took his badge off and he gave it to Turpin, and he walked out. Just before he left, they stopped him. They said, "There's one more thing." They took out a solid gold badge and pinned it on his lapel. The badge said, A.C. Ramsey, Chief of Police, 1914. And on that day, we became Corona Police Department. Now, A.C. Ramsey kind of brought us into modern policing. Under his administration, he got us the red signal at 6th and Main Street to alert officers that they were needed. Now, of course, they still had to go find a phone or run back to City Hall to find out what they were needed for. But when they saw the red light at 6th and Main, they knew they were needed. He also brought in, gave us procedures for doing traffic enforcement. Prior to that, we never had anything like that. And he got the city trustees to buy a motorcycle. And we had enforcement with a motorcycle. And he made his department, all 3 of them, wear police uniforms, which they had to come up with themselves. So they went to the tailor and said, "Hey, I need this, it should be this color." But they were all uniform. Now, another interesting thing that happened while Chief Ramsey was here was we became involved in the First World War in April 1917. And with that, there was a panic in the town. As I said, we were very diverse ethnically, and they came to find out that there was some possibility that Mexico would ally herself with Germany during the First World War. And they were convinced that Mexico would invade Corona. So, Chief Ramsey appointed and deputized 100 townspeople to protect the infrastructure of the city, the power plant, the water works, and so forth. And they trained until 1919, protecting the city from foreign invasion. So let's go to 1922. A $1,000 reward for the apprehension of Jack Myers, dead or alive. 1922, Chief Reddens was our chief. He was driving his own personal vehicle that he used to patrol with, because chiefs had to work patrol too. And he sees Jack Myers, a known vagrant, in City Park at the corner of Victoria and Rimbaud. So he pulls over because he noticed that Jack Reddens has a bundle in his hands, and it looks suspicious to him. As he gets out of the car, Jack Myers fires 5 rounds at Chief Reddens. Chief Reddens is hit twice, once in the wrist on his right hand, so he can't use his gun. He has to use it, but he does pull his revolver with his weak hand and returns fire. Jack Myers runs down Quarry Street into the riverbed. The chief gets back in his car with one flat tire from a bullet run and drives to the cigar shop at 106 East 6th Street to tell people what happened. Within an hour, there was hundreds of citizens armed, more or less a lynch mob, going door to door searching for Jack Myers. They spent all day and the following day going door to door, 3 yards, and through the fields looking for him. They never did find him. But 6 weeks later, Jack Myers ended up in San Dimas Township and killed Constable Funkhauser in a gunfight after the burglary. And he still is never apprehended. Later, Chief Eli Garner, he'd been a police officer at Corona for 4 months when he was selected to become chief. And that was 1926. During his 14-year tenure, he rose staffing to 8 officers. It was Chief Garner that unknowingly met the child serial murderer, Gordon Nortop, from, you may recall the movie Changeling. Well, that serial killer that was doing those murders in Eastville came to Corona because we were more or less the only town that was nearby. Nortop talked to Chief Garner and Officer Bill Patterson to report that his nephew was missing, and he wanted to post a $1,000 reward for his return. So they met him on 2 occasions, not knowing that he was wanted for murder. Chief Sam Lowry started at Corona Police Department in 1928. He became a traffic officer right off the bat by the fact that he owned his own motorcycle. He became chief in 1942 and brought 2 cutting-edge technologies to the police department. One was the numerically filed police report, and the other was the police radio. One-way radio, not 2-way radio. It was radios. And he also mentored 2 future chiefs during his 24-year service. Joe Greer. Joe Greer was connected to Corona Police Department as early as 1936, but he was hired as a police officer in 1941, only to be sent off to serve in World War II. But when he returned, they made him a motor officer and climbed the ranks throughout the years to become chief in 1966. After retiring from CPD, he became the airport manager and served the city a total of 48 years. He was also quite a local historian. If you go through the newspaper archives, you'll see on several occasions, instead of talking about what was going on in the police department every day, he normally wanted to talk about the old days. So he was one of our very first local history. On to Chief Farnham. Jack Farnham became a Corona police officer in 1946. He was discharged out of the Army Air Forces. And he stopped by here at the police department to get a taxi cab from him. He was going to work as a taxi cab driver. But C.B. Biggers encouraged him to apply as a police officer. So he put in an application and didn't think anything of it. And they said, "You're starting tomorrow." So he says, "Well, okay, but I don't know anything about being a police officer. I don't have a uniform." "Wear your Army uniform, find a gun, just a random .44 revolver." And it was kind of a learn-as-you-go type thing. So During his tenure as a captain and a chief, the first police matrons and clerks were hired at the police department, our first female employees. Now, before 1962, if you had a female arrestee, an officer was required to call his wife in to do the searching. Joe Greer and Jack Farnham became the co-founders of the Corona PD Aero Squadron, using their own Luscombe Silver airplane and their own resources. They became a pioneering force in police aviation in 1947. Now, from 1947 until the 1970s, they supported the police department with doing surveillances and searches for lost persons, and improved the effectiveness of eyes from the air, and paved the way for the department's future endeavors in police air support. Lastly, I want to talk about diversity. I know I've kind of painted a picture that this was maybe an all-white, good old boys club from the get-go, and more or less it probably was. But sometimes the police department was at the forefront of diversity, and other times it went kicking and screaming. Now, in 1975, Sheila Collins filed a state labor board complaint so she could become a police officer. And she was our first sworn female police officer. And she paved the way for many women in the police force. Hispanic Tony Espinosa joined the force in 1952, followed by Serafine Garcia. African Americans James Chavis and Bill Howe were hired in 1971, followed by the first Southeast Asian officer, William McCall. Today, Corona Police Department's diversity mirrors the community that we serve in. So thank you. On the early days, it would take forever to go through all the interesting stories that's happened since the beginning. It would take way too long. The gentleman seated here guided Corona Police Department through the last 4 decades, and they have a lot to talk about, so that's what we're going to go to. Karen, we're going to keep the responses to 2 minutes. Gentlemen, the responses, we're going to try to keep it 2 minutes so we can get everybody in. And you kept us on the short leash, so I hope there's someone else my turn.
Not short enough.
I'll pitch the first question here, and if you'd like to answer it, please do, and then you can pass it on to whoever wants to ask the question. Tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll start from the end. Chief Claiborne. By the way, Chief Claiborne, impeccable taste in hiring entry-level police officers.
Well, I was born in Pasadena, California. And I grew up in West Los Angeles. I went to University High School, so named because it was close to UCLA. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I graduated from high school, but I was in the library and I saw a brochure advertising a police science course at LACC. And I had worked with a couple of police officers in a butcher shop that I worked in while I was in high school. And we became friends with them, and I even went on a ride-along with one of them in a stick-shift Ford. And it was very interesting, and I ended up going to LACC, and most of the instructors were LA police officers. So I became more and more interested and decided I wanted to be an LA officer. So I took the exam and passed it, and I got into the academy in May of 1958. And about June or July, I believe it was, I got my draft notice to go into the Army. And it was going to be, my induction was going to occur before my graduation from the academy. So I went down to the draft board and I said, will you extend my induction? So they extended it for 1 month, which gave me a very short time in the field to after graduation. Then I was gone to the Army for 2 years. I returned to the department in August of 1960, and I was assigned to Wilshire Patrol. During the time I was employed with LA, I continued my education while I was on the job and got my BA and MA at that time. So I had many assignments and advancements, and that's pretty much my background and my time's up.
It's going to be interesting because you're going to hear some parallels with my life and John and our careers. I'm Richard Gonzalez. I was raised in Southern California. Went to college and saw a flyer about a police student worker program. And the requirement was you had to be in college. I applied, was hired by the LAPD as a police student worker, which is just like a police cadet that we have here in Corona. Became a police officer in '72 with LAPD. I loved it. Became a police captain, and then just thought, I wonder what it would be like to be the boss. I applied for an agency that had 26 officers. That's going to be chief of police. I didn't make it in the first cut. And so I applied with 2 other agencies, Corona being one, and I was blessed to be selected as the chief of police in early '98. And was the chief for 10.5 years, had an absolute great time here. In 1977, I married my wife Terry. We raised 2 boys, and we still live in Corona. I've been retired for 10 years. Thank you.
Good morning. My background's a bit different than these 2 gentlemen to my right. My whole career has been on Corona PD. This is where I grew up and was fortunate and blessed to spend 30 years here serving in this city. So my background, I grew up in Orange County, and then during my high school years, we moved out here to Riverside County. And more of on even though I knew it's a future question, but even as a young boy, I knew I wanted to be a police officer. It was always my life dream to be a police officer. But it was during high school where a friend kind of dared me to join him and apply for the Corona Police Department back in 1987. So I took him up on it and was fortunate and blessed that I got hired and he didn't. And started the career with Corona in '87. And then just had the opportunity, and timing's everything, and so's luck, and a little bit of good encouragement, but was able to work every single rank within the Corona Police Department. So started as a cadet and just worked my way up as a police officer, detective, sergeant, lieutenant, captain. And then in 2011, when the chief at the time, Richard Madory, Terry's brother, retired, I took over as the interim chief. And then in early 2012, the city manager at the time, Brad Robbins, after a testing process, made me the permanent chief, where I served until the very end of 2017. So just an absolute wonderful career, loved every second of it, and would do it all over again tomorrow if I could. Personally, got it, Karen, 30 seconds. Personally, been married, it'll be 20 years this year, so we celebrated our 20-year anniversary, which was wonderful, and have a beautiful young daughter, 15 years old, so thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'll apologize for a froggy voice, but it's still working. So. My name is Sam Spiegel, and my career with the Corona Police Department actually started due to the late O.J. Watson. He was a local patrol officer, motorcycle officer, father of Debbie Watson, who was a classmate of mine at the high school. And in the the early 70s, early 71, after the Los Angeles riots, there was a tremendous amount of money being pushed out by the Department of Justice for community relations programs and programs that would help law enforcement get more engaged in the community. The City of Corona applied for a grant for that. Part of that grant, and it was much more involved with not enough time to get to all of that, but part of that program brought a police science program into the high school, and OJ was the selected instructor for that program for many years. The most popular program in the high school, I might add. I never attended the course, but OJ had come to me in my senior year in high school and said, hey, I know you're interested in law, and very similar to what Richard talked about, the cadet program actually required that you had to be enrolled in college and carry the minimum load, maintain a certain grade point average, and you could actually get part-time paid for this, and they work your schedule around around your college schedule. So I was fortunate enough to do that. I started as a cadet, dispatcher, reserve, regular officer, up the ranks to captain, and in late 2000, I tested for the position of chief of police in the city of Folsom, where I moved to take that position. Was chief for 10 years and retired at the end of 2010, and just happy raising grandchildren with my wife Catherine, who's in the back.
My name's Ray Coda, and thank you all for all being here today. It's really exciting. When I got up this morning, it was raining and everything. I didn't think it was going to be anybody in here except we were going to be talking to ourselves. And thanks very much for showing us. It's a wonderful event. My venture into police work is probably totally different than maybe some of everybody else's here. Had no idea I was ever going to become a police officer. In fact, my path was heading towards being a studio musician. But at one point in time, I realized I got tired of just having, $2 or $3 in my pocket, and that wasn't going to take care of bills, and probably wasn't going to, help me out, in the long run. I started taking administration and justice classes at Mount San Antonio College, if you're familiar with Mount SAC. Met a couple of wonderful guys, when the chief Leghorn and Gonzalez talk about LAPD. These two guys that were teaching classes, they were from LAPD, and I tell you, the stories they told about what went on in police work and what you would get involved in and the types of things that you would encounter, it caught my eye. And I couldn't wait to start looking for a job. At the time, I was only 20 years old. I happened to find an ad in the LA Times, of all places, that said, City of Corona is looking to hire police officers, and all you have to be is 20 years old. Okay, that sounds good. Where's Corona? So I had to get out my little Thomas Guide map, figure out where Corona was, come down to 71, and sure enough, I had enjoyed a wonderful, almost 31-year career here. Eventually was able to be selected to be the chief of police in Sedona, Arizona, where I did that for 6 years. Met my wife here in Corona, and we raised our son here in town. And so we've been married now. We just celebrated our 35th year anniversary just last year. So it's been a wonderful career and wonderful life here in Corona.
Hi, my name is John Dalzell, and I grew up in Arizona, not California. And the Navy brought me to California, and at the end of my naval career in 1970, 71, they sent me to a police academy at Camp Pendleton with myself and 30 Marines. And it was a California post-approved police academy. At the end of the academy, the coordinator talked about a small community in Riverside County where the reserves could actually work in the field as a police officer. Well, I still had about 5 months to go in the Navy. I came to Corona, went to Human Resources, filled out an application, and was told to come back the next morning for the testing process. The testing process was pretty simple. I went to the high school with a guy named Manuel Martinez, took an agility, came back, took a written, took an oral, met the chief, and was hired. The Navy assigned me temporary assigned duties in the Corona Police Department until I got out. 2 weeks after I got out, I was offered a full-time job. And that's how I got here. And the rest of my time, he mentioned an Officer Sherman that was shot at in 1914. The Sherman family has been in Corona since the 1800s. The back of the room is Tom Sherman, who I think is about 4 generations down from that. The Shermans have also been in public service. They're firefighters. Tom's dad was a firefighter. However, Tom's son is the commanding officer of the largest Air Force base in the United States. So the Sherman family has been here a long time. A young man sitting back there named Steve Evans was standing next to me, and we were sworn in together. And I want to recognize him.
Hello, my name is Roy Vandercullen. Everybody really just called me Vandy throughout my career here, but I'm not really Asian. I'm Dutch Indonesian. My parents were born on the islands of Indonesia. They were both captured by the Japanese during World War II and imprisoned, and it somewhat shaped, you know, our family's lives. My mom's dad was the chief of police in Medan, Sumatra. And Sumatra is where I think it was about 130,000 people were lost to that one tsunami that hit. But the growing up there, they were raised there, the islands were beautiful. I've been back a couple times. My mom always cried to go back home, you know, but they were thrown out of Indonesia right after the war because the Indonesians really didn't like the way they were treated by the Dutch. So we ended up in Holland, the whole family. My mom had 20 brothers and sisters. Most of them were all ended up in Holland, stayed in Holland. I have 11 brothers and sisters. 4 were born in Holland, 2 in Indonesia. I was born in New Guinea. My dad was with the Dutch Indonesian Army, stationed in New Guinea at the time. And a little bit about New Guinea, at the time I was born, they still had cannibals there. And one of my mom's sisters, she was married, and he was also stationed there, so she disappeared along with 3 kids. And it was really strange because they always said that they were taken by the cannibals. So I was the only one born in New Guinea. We went back to Holland after my dad's time there. He was a sergeant major and he was at military police. So we come from a police background. They said it was a little bit too cold. Am I at 0? Oh, am I going up? Oh, I'm sorry. We went back to Holland, ended up coming to California by way of Michigan and Ohio because we wanted to be in a warm climate. Grew up in Ontario with my 11 brothers and sisters. Applied for, went to college at Laverne College. Really was going to become a teacher. Ended up seeing an ad like Ray did. Came down here. A couple of my buddies from high school were down here. Steve Allegre and Dennis Winslow. Applied and got hired here. And it's a great career. Thank you.
Roy's brother, Johannes, is a patrolman still at the police department. I think he's in his 60th year now. Will not leave.
He's probably the only police officer in California that has come back to work after having a 6-way heart bypass surgery. So, yeah, our dad really instilled the work ethic. You know, to go to work.
We see him in morning briefing and we just look at him and say, why? Just go.
Just go.
Okay, the next question. How did you decide to become a police officer? And what was the hiring process? If you kind of already addressed it, you feel free to pass the mic. Chief? Chief?
Okay, I think I already covered that with talking about meeting some police officers and ultimately decided to go to college and take police science and ended up on the LAPD. So I'd like to spend my time finishing up the first question. And I had many assignments on the LAPD and reached the rank of Captain 3 and was in that rank when the department had the 1984 Olympics. And my assignment was anti-terrorist division, so I was very active during that time. And I was offered the position at Corona PD by Jim Wheaton, who had talked to a mutual friend named Bob Vernon, who was an assistant chief of LAPD. I had not planned to come to Corona PD, but Bob Vernon called me and said, John, what are you doing these days? Well, I was actually going into real estate. But he said, well, there's an opportunity to go to Corona PD as interim police chief. So I came out and talked to Jim Wheaton and ended up coming to Corona. Well, in Corona, I met my lovely wife, Kathy. She's here in the front. Both of us lost our spouses about 6 or 7 years ago, and we have been married for almost, will be 5 years this coming October. So, anyway, when I decided to be a police officer, I was involved in written and oral exams as well as the physical agility, psychological, medical, and background. And my academy class, the exam was given at the LA High School. And the school was full, and I thought, well, this is going to be tough getting a job as a police officer in LA with all this competition. But I was lucky, and I got pretty good grades on the exam. Ended up in the academy. I started with 59 cadets and ended up with 46. The ones that dropped out, the 13 that dropped out, were their backgrounds caught up with them because they had not been completed before they started the academy.
Kind of answered this one, but I'll tell a quick story. I graduated from high school, and my friend Tom had a party. And his dad sits me down, and he says, hey, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm not going to college. I need a job. I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to fix up my car. He goes, you want a job? He was a foreman at a meat packing company. He goes, I'll hire you. And it was great because I'm going to work with my friend Tom. This guy worked me like a dog. He picked me up at 4 in the morning, and I was at the end of a conveyor belt about as deep as that man standing there with the glasses. I had all this meat coming to me. I turned 18 on July 30th, and I said, Richard, are you going to do this your whole life? And so I went to Cerritos College. I'm in line, and I sit in front of this guy, and he goes, what do you want to major in? And I said, I don't know, but I belong here. And he opens this book, and he says, how about criminal justice. We have a really good program here. And I said, sure. And I signed up, and I went back, and I had to tell my friend's dad, I need to give you notice, I'm going to college. And he gave me a look. He goes, oh, really? You're going to college? And that's when I lit up and figured out he worked me like a dog.
So as I mentioned, just something I always wanted to do. I knew as a very young boy that I just wanted to be a police officer. I looked up to police officers, military, and just was admired the work that they did and knew that that was something that I truly wanted to do, and I was just fortunate enough to land here in the city of Corona and spend my career here. As for the hiring process, very similar to what John mentioned. Even back in '87, as a cadet being hired on, you went through the full process, and then once sponsored for the police academy, same thing, a full background investigation on your life. Talk to your neighbors, get involved in everything you've ever done, fill out a huge questionnaire, go through a psychological exam, which you leave thinking you knew yourself, and you're more confused than when you walked in the door after speaking to a psychologist and all the tests and answers, questions you have to answer. Polygraph exam, medical exam, and then an oral panel. So it's very thorough, was back then and it still is today. So thank you.
So I mentioned earlier that the easiest part of starting with the police department was OJ saying, yeah, just go down and get the job. The hardest part was this laborious process that every one of us have gone through in one form or another. I was hired by Joseph Greer. He was the chief of police when I was brought on. I was also hired by Jack Farnham, and because the first hiring was as a police cadet, and Joe Greer, he was at the forefront of law enforcement education. He was one of the original chiefs that helped formulate the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, and he was very, very much dedicated to professionalizing law enforcement. So if you wanted to be a cop in Corona, you had to attend his night school class at Corona High School. And if you cut that mustard, then you could be considered from the Corona Police Department. So although I started as the police cadet, I could get on with that, but I had to get enrolled in that night class in addition to the classes I was taking at Fullerton College, so that the chief knew that I was serious about coming to work here. Call it there.
Similar to what, Chief Gonzalez mentioned about, being involved in hard work. I mean, and that's what I was doing before I even decided to become a police officer. I mean, I was working in factories, I was packing boxes, I was knocking off, sledge on welds and on beams in the middle of New Mexico. And it was something that was just going, I need to do something else. I want to be part of something else. I want to be part of something bigger than what I'm doing now. And that's what really drove me to look for that. And then when I found that, it was just the answer. I mean, the answer to that question, it was just there. And so, and I think all of us feel that way. We feel when we reach to where we really feel that we belong, we want to stay there for as long as possible. And that career here allowed me to do that.
When I say I grew up in a small town in Arizona, small is 25 people. One of them was a deputy sheriff, a resident deputy. The other one was an Arizona highway patrolman named Roger Bowman. During high school, I probably rode hundreds of hours with Roger in an Arizona highway patrol car while he was working. So I pretty much knew what I wanted to do. A couple of jobs after high school before the Navy kind of taught me what I didn't want to do. The Navy allowed me to go to the police academy, so that set me up to coming to Corona. And I got to fulfill what I had wanted to do for several years. working in the city of Corona was the best decision I ever made. I look back at the 31 years, and they were wonderful years and a great place to be. My youngest son is just in his 21st year with the LAPD. So there's a second generation Del out there. And my dad was in law enforcement for a short period of time in his younger days. So that's pretty much that question. And I'm going to bag my time here.
Gosh, the only thing I remember about the hiring process here is that you end up in the chief's office, and it's pretty much you're hired. But he did ask me one question. He asked, because I was hired, I believe, under a grant, or they were trying to get me hired under a grant, because monies were scarce because of Prop 13 at the time. So the one question he asked me, he goes, "You are Mexican, aren't you?" I had to say no. So I'm not sure if I got hired under the grant, but they did keep me.
I got to do this for just one thing. I too was hired by Joe Greer. A guy named Mark Delacruz and I walked in the door to meet the chief. Art was coming out of the Marine Corps, I was coming out of the Navy. And the first thing Joe Greer said to us is, "By God, you two look like police officers."
We've touched on some of the other questions we're going to ask, so I'm going to skip down because I think this is very important. The question I want to pose to all of you is, what is the biggest change or development that you either created or assisted with as a staff member of Corona Police Department? Chief Claymore?
What number question is that?
Number 6.
Pardon?
Number 6. What is the biggest change or development that you caused during your career at the police department?
Okay. Well, my experience was from 1985 to 1997, 12 years. And during that 12 years was one of the highest growth periods for the city of Corona. I remember seeing really big, large real estate signs in the groves advertising acres for sale. And someone had taken a can of spray paint and painted on the sign, "Stop Growth." I don't know if anybody remembers that. And I always often wondered when that person who was painting that came to town. He was very likely part of the growth. But the city population more than doubled during those 12 years. The citrus and avocado trees were sold to developers and became businesses, residential areas, parks, schools, and churches. And new residents came to Corona to find less expensive land. They said at one time that from Orange County to Corona, you took off $1,000 a mile on property values. The Corona Police Department also more than doubled, and the booming police department became attractive to officers on other police departments. So we ended up having a lineup of what we call lateral applicants at the door. And the department previously had hired entry-level officers and then sent them to the academy, trained them, and brought them back as police officers. That didn't happen so much during the 12 years that I was with the department. We were hiring laterals, pre-trained cadets, including Mike. And so we were particularly with the laterals, we were had a real good opportunity to investigate their backgrounds and how they'd done on the department they were coming from, and to select the best. And we did in the department. We had an outstanding group that was just added to the outstanding group that was already there.
The biggest change I saw in my career, it benefited policing was the Corona Police Department involved in the community. I was amazed. You don't know what you have here when you look at other communities. I was shocked with Archangels, Roy, very active in that, with Bud Gordon, tremendous. If we needed money, we could go to the business community, and if you had a youth program, a story to tell, boy, people always gave. And it was amazing to see. The other thing was the police department engaged with other city entities, working together to solve problems. That was just a huge change. In my time here, like John, tremendous growth. There was nothing south of Ontario, but there were plans, and to see all of that, we had to focus on what are we going to do with this tremendous increase with the teenagers in town. And if you know anything about crime and crime statistics, from age 14 to 24, you have a extremely high percentage of your crime committed by that group. And so we implemented a lot of programs with the youth, and it really helped to keep the community safe.
Just kind of echoing both chiefs, to give you an idea of growth, when I started in the 80s, we were like 67, 69, something like that, police officers, and then I retired we were at 167, so tremendous growth in those 30 years. I completely agree. There was a big shift in law enforcement during my career, and involved a buzz term of, we'll call it community-oriented policing. Police as a whole went from being a reactive agency to responding and actually handling the situation versus just a report, resolving the problem for the community. And Corona, as Chief Gonzalez alluded to, was a leader in that area when it came to community interaction, community partnership, working with the community to make it a better community. So we were very involved in that whole community-oriented policing change in law enforcement, and it still carries on today with the various proactive teams that the department has, whether it's even back then the NET team under Chief Cleghorn, our Flex teams, our HOPE team, all the stuff that the men and women of the Corona Police Department do today to be in partnership. And like Chief Gonzalez mentioned, just all the community interaction that all of us were involved in, from the chief of police down to the police officer and cadets, and just staying very involved in the community. The one thing that I didn't hear mentioned yet was technology. So technology was a huge boom in our career, my career, and it still is today. But back when all of us worked, when we first started, you had a flip map and you were trying to find out where to go to. Obviously everyone has phones now and Waze, and you're finding where you need to get to immediately. But technology and equipment have changed tremendously, and it's a big officer safety issue. And for Corona PD, always led when it came to having the best equipment, the best safety equipment, the best training, and that's so important for law enforcement. So big changes, and happy to see Corona was always in front of those changes. Thank you.
So I think you'd find almost uniformly that everyone up here would speak to community policing and engagement of the community. So I'm going to get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of things that created significant change in the development of law enforcement, both as a profession, but particularly at Corona PD. Chief Cleghorn talked about the massive growth that occurred, and under his leadership, one of the first things he did when he went from interim chief to full-time chief was to recognize that due to the department's growth and the city's growth, that we were about to emerge from a small police department to a mid-sized police department. And it was time for the agency to get out of the typewriter-written policies that had been legacy policies for years in the department, and to professionalize the department. And so he created the Professional Standards and Planning Unit, in addition to completely rewriting all of the policies for the police department. We embarked on that involvement with the other departments that Richard talked about. We got involved in something called development plan reviews, where there was a police department representative at all of those planning meetings with the planning department, public works, utilities, the Chamber of Commerce, all of the economic development issues, so that instead of being reactive as a police department, we were actually planning along with the city as we looked at projected growth, as we looked at what are we going to need for additional officers and what those impacts would be. Technology I could talk about till the cows come home, and air support has always been my passion, and we'll save that for another time.
Yeah, I grew up in Baldwin Park, California, and so when I knew that Corona was on its rise to be becoming something really significant, is when they built In-N-Out down the road. I knew we were on our way once In-N-Out showed up. But beyond that, it's already been mentioned a couple times, but I just want to mention a couple times more. Both Chiefs Cleghorn and Gonzalez, I mean, they were the most instrumental people that I have ever seen in terms of taking the police department from being a small organization that had somewhat of an interaction with the community to a full-fledged professional police department whose sole existence was to be a community partner. I was fortunate enough that Chief Cleghorn allowed me to start up, Chief Abel mentioned the NET team, the Neighborhood Enhancement Team. We started that in 1990. It was just a small group of officers, some detectives, and we were trying to find a new way to provide police service. And that grew into what we have today, to some degree. We went from a beat structure to a zone structure, where we had lieutenants who were responsible for certain areas of the community, who would respond to the needs of those residents that were in those communities. We brought on additional people, such as Karen, to help us with crime analysis and taking a look at how everything fit together and how we should put things and actually focus our resources to where they need to be. The community involvement thing was huge for me, and I was very fortunate, to join Roy and his efforts with, Archangels and the number of things that we did to assist, the youth in the community. And I think that's always been very a fantastic partnership. It's been something that I've been truly proud to be blessed to be part of. And I sure hope and I don't know if that still continues today, but I sure hope it still continues today.
I think I probably saw the most change, because when I came in '71, the department was about 30 total sworn personnel. And when I left, it was around 150 plus. The city was 26,000 population, and when I left, it was over 150,000. One of the biggest changes I saw was actually in financing, because the early years with the PD, up until the early 80s, money was pretty scarce, and we were pretty limited. But then with all the growth, that changed, and as we started to expand, we were able to, as the chief said, really attract some qualified people. And the growth, in a way, forced us to change the way we did business. And when Chief Cleghorn came in, Chief Lowry before him, we became far more a department that offered great community service, far more than a lot of agencies around us. And I think the community responded to that. And that's why we've been as successful as we have. Because we've always had that community support. And once the growth started loosening up the money, we were able to grow. And as they mentioned before me, the technology followed, the advancement in better policies and procedures followed. And of course, Chief Cleghorn came in, said probably the most important thing I've ever heard in law enforcement. And his philosophy was, You don't tell people what you can't do. You tell people what you can do. And that was a cultural change, and it's very simple. If somebody asks you a question, even if it's something that the department, it's out of the department's purview, you don't say, well, we don't do that. What you say is, well, let me find out who can help you. And, you know, that is a tremendous philosophy for any public agency to have.
Well, let me come from a different perspective. Before we actually brought the outside chiefs in from LAPD, we used to go down Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights, and it would just be downtown. We would have to address the gangs. And we would try to do that, but we, at the end of the day, we would be called off and we would be backed out. And that's when the chiefs came in from LA and they said, no, let's organize a flex team, the net team, and let's address it. And that was when we finally did address it. And we took care of the complaints down there and made it a safe neighborhood again. But the politics before that, and when you're talking about professionalism and bringing different standards to a police department, the politics before that were such that somebody may have said something to whoever, and it came down through the upper echelon of the police department at times is, you know, let's back out of that. And we really didn't address it. And after we got the chiefs from LA, yes, we did address that and we took care of the problem. And this city really has become a safe city because of it.
Gentlemen, I think this is going to be our last question, so no softball answers. What is your most memorable incident of your career? It could be a good memory, a bad memory. It could be the first black and white crash. The first days off you got, whatever.
Well, I have a good and a bad. And the bad was the loss of Officer Patty Dwyer. It was a very memorable incident. It happened about a year after I came to Corona, and it was a terrible thing for the police department to lose her. He was a well-liked, outstanding officer. He was a canine officer, and it was a terrible tragedy, and it's one of the things that I'll always remember about the department. The good thing was that when I came into Corona PD, I came as the interim chief, and I explored the department. If, you know, I can take the chief's exam, do I want to be the chief of this department? And I found the department to be an outstanding department. That I had to all go, for us to go forward and to accomplish the things that we did. And I personally want to thank them for making my job easy, making me feel welcome, and helping to build Corona to what it is today. Thank you.
Most memorable incident here in Corona was an officer getting shot. He got shot 3 times. I remember going to the scene, there was blood everywhere, going to the hospital and talking to the doctor, and meeting his wife, Julie, and dealing with all of that. And then I think George was with me, George Gunn. We left the hospital, and to see the amount of employees and their family members there. And of course, they all wanted to know. And it took over a year for that officer to recover. He did. And through that, we expanded the peer support group, which is an amazing program here at the Corona Police Department. It helps employees, it helps family members struggling with things, and it's a vehicle to let all of the employees know, hey, here's what's going on with this individual. But it took Dan a long time to recover. I remember seeing him coming in with a cane. We put him in a detective assignment, and boy, just through time to see him recover, that was memorable. Thank you.
In full transparency, we spoke before about some of these questions, and this was one that we had in common for sure, because that night I was the night watch commander, and I got the phone call first and responded out to the scene. But I remember it like yesterday, calling my chief, Chief Gonzalez, at home and telling him we just had an officer shot. And I will never, ever forget that in my career. So, as the chief talked about, all the things that follow up after that, but that's just something you never want to experience in your career. And by the grace of God, and we're also fortunate that Dan is okay and recovered and still doing great today. But that will always stand out as the most memorable event that occurred in my career. And then just on a lighter note, and I think it's probably for all of us, the day you get your badge pinned on is a big deal. It's a big deal. You never forget, you never should forget the day that you walk across the stage at the academy and you actually become a police officer. So I will cherish that memory as well.
I too remember the night Patty was shot, and it sounds like all the horrific things that people being shot, but this is the reality of our job, and it's what unfortunately a lot of the public don't think about in the day-to-day efforts. A police officer that suits up, goes out, leaves their family, and hopes to make it home to that family again. I looked at Patty's death, and my way of dealing with it was all of the good that came from a very tragic thing. At the time we were working on new policies, there was a stack on my desk of things that were in the works, but there were other operational things that needed to be done. Our shooting policy needed to be updated, pursuit policy, those things, more frequent potential high-risk issues that needed to be addressed with. In the stack, all of my backup materials was, gee, what about peer support? What about critical incident debriefings? Those types of things. What do we do if, God forbid, we lost an officer? And as Terry mentioned, Marshal Alexander was the only officer that we had lost. And I'm proud to say was well before my time. Patty's loss brought a lot of things to play. When Chief Clayton called me, I know that Captain Dalzell was meeting him at the hospital, and they were dealing with the criminal side of things, and he passed the football, the administrative side to me, and said, you better pull out all that stuff that we've been talking about these things, because we're going to need it. And those things eventually came into play, some of them immediately within 24 hours of Patty's passing. A second incident that occurred that's maybe on a little bit lighter note because it's a positive ending. Deputy Joe Cleary was shot on a traffic stop on Highway 60 in the Banning area. I can't even tell you what year it was. But there was a long pursuit. Suspects eventually crashed at the Lincoln Avenue off-ramp. I happened to be the watch commander that night. We set up a perimeter and a very large perimeter and started a search grid that went on for almost 12 hours. And there were a lot of people that wanted to give up on that night because they just thought they weren't there. And lo and behold, we stuck to it at the very end of that night. Suspects were taken into custody. They made their way all the way to Smith Street on foot through the night after hiding in places. We had helicopters, we had everything looking for them. We took 3 of the 4 assailants in custody for shooting Joe and the fourth one was picked up in LA by Riverside Sheriff's detectives the following week. The working relationship that we had, the respect that we had from the other agencies around us, because we had evolved to a professional organization. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the phenomenal working relationship that we had with our fire department, and being able to work hand in hand with them on a sundry of things on a day-to-day basis is really the foundation of what public safety became in Corona, and still is to this day.
How do you sum up, 31 careers and 31 years in a career and say what's your most memorable incident? Everything that everybody spoke about is deeply ingrained, I think, in all of our memories, and never, ever will go away. If I had to sum up just one thing that probably encompasses all of that, is I found myself, being injured on duty, quite several years ago. Ended up in the Corona community, was there for, quite a few days, and I'll never forget all the department personnel, the officers, the civilian staff that were just there to support me. And beyond that is the countless letters and cards and phone calls that I got from people in this community. It's just unbelievable. And so if there's anything that, that there's a question here, what would you tell a rookie police officer? Always be supported. Always.
I think I'm like Ray, and Sam and a couple others. I mean, I was the person that went to the hospital to identify Pat. Worst moment of my life. But the best moments are all the camaraderie with all the good people you work with. Those are the best moments. Yeah, there's a lot of exciting things that happen job-wise, but, they come and go, and they're a lot of fun for a little bit, and you remember them, but what you remember overall is the good people, the good friends that you work with. And it's not just the members of the department, it's the people in the community you meet that you're still friends with, 20 years later. I've been retired for 17 years now, and this is still one of the best communities to be in. I still have a ton of friends here, and I still have enough contact with the department that I don't feel like I'm out in the cold. And the department's still doing very well. And so those are the good moments for me. It's the people, not necessarily the things.
I think one of the things that impacted me the most in my early career here was when the police department felt that they were underpaid, and the association got everyone together and they had the courage to go on strike. It was very early in my career, and I'm thinking, this young officer, I'm thinking, oh man, what's going to happen with us? This and that. And some of you know, most of you know this, but some of you don't, and that the entire police department, with the exception of the chief and the assistant chief, at the time, went to another state, so we couldn't be subpoenaed to come back to work. And we were getting congratulations from all over the world for having the courage to do it. And it took about 4 days, and an incident here in town where they said, okay, let's bring them back and let's get them the money they deserve. Because we were grossly underpaid. I remember, I think I was on the department 2 or 3 years, and I was getting a check. My house payment was $330, and every 2 weeks I was bringing home $303. So it was $606, and I still had that check at home. Copy of it. And it was very difficult. But one thing you do see here in front of you, and I wanted to mention Bob Martin back there, he's also a captain, and he should, I don't know if he's shy, but he should also be up here with us. But we all live in town. We feel that safe about this town. We've made those relationships. I love going out and talking to the businessmen. You know, we loved coming in on our days off. We work 4 days a week. We'd come in and ride with each other in our early careers 2 or 3 days a week, just to jump in and hang out with the fellow cop and go ride for free. That was very common. We loved going down there and having rocks and bottles thrown at us. It was exciting. We loved chasing people. But, yeah, I mean, it was something that a young cop, you know, that's their adrenaline. And we love that. And I think the association, and there's some members back here, you have to give them credit. It was a very move, you know? What could have gone wrong on us? Could some of us have been arrested? Because all of us didn't leave the state at the time. There were some conditions where some of us stayed behind. But we were hidden very well. They weren't going to find us. But thank you.
And that actually changed everything as far as salary within the department, because when that strike was over, there were policies written that moved us from the bottom of a 10-city list to between 1 and 2. And even though the 4 days, 5 days was really hectic, and by the way, the incident brought everybody back. The police chief took a shot at a burglar running across the street as the city councilman's wife drove by. The councilman called me at about 10 o'clock at night, and I said, "Oh, stop worrying. He wasn't shooting at your wife. He was shooting at a burglar."
The next day, they came back.
And it really didn't benefit just the police department. It benefited all the city employees.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Lastly, I already apologize to Chief George Johnstone that I bushwhacked him from here, but I wanted him to stand up and tell us a little bit about himself. Chief George Johnstone.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words and introduce myself. I'd first like to thank the gentleman seated at this table and all of the alumni from Corona Police Department that are seated in the audience. It was a true honor to follow in your footsteps and to inherit such an excellent organization and such fine men and women that are still currently working at Corona Police Department. So thank you. So I've been here 5 months, so I get exactly 2 minutes and then my shit's off. So I come from the city of La Habra, and prior to that from the city of Chino. Much like Chief Abel, in 1987 I took a position as a police cadet, and that's where I found calling. There was no other job that I was going to do other than being a police officer. By 1990 I was a reserve officer. I was out doing it for free for the city of Chino. And in 1991, self-sponsored myself through a police academy, and the city of La Habra said, "Hey, we think we got a shot for you." So much like some of the people up here, I looked up where's La Habra, because I know it. But it truly was a blessing for me. The city of La Habra allowed me experiences, opportunities, and friendships that allowed me to develop myself to be a candidate for chief of police. Through the city of La Habra, I worked as a police officer, police canine. In the detective unit, I had the opportunity to work robbery and homicide, investigate multiple homicides and a double homicide case in one. Had great learning experiences through those experiences. Afterwards, I served 16 years as a part-time duty on a regional SWAT team. So really learned the cooperation of working with other surrounding communities and how to leverage support of other communities as well in policing. So through those 16 years, rose up from an operator to a team commander, eventually at the end of that. And eventually became a lieutenant and then a police captain for 5 years with the city of La Habra. As a police captain, my goal was to have community engagement. And I pushed that very hard to my people, from my canine team to my detectives, especially my gang unit. It wasn't just about enforcement, it was about engagement. It was getting out there and preventing the next member from seeing gangs as an option. It was about building the relationships with the community. So if an event happened in a neighborhood, we had legitimacy. They felt comfortable calling us. They knew we would do the right thing, and they knew we would capture the bad guy and do it with integrity. So that was really important to me, and I pushed that strongly. I had the opportunity to test here for the city of Corona, did my due diligence in examining the Arizona incident with reading about that and other past events, that I found this to be just a stellar department. If there was one place I wanted to go, it would be the city of Corona. I've been welcomed by the city, by the community, and by the members of the department, and I thank them all. I truly want to echo, I hope you know what you have. I don't want to say you don't know what you have, but I hope you know. It is hard to find a community that engages with its police department as this community does. Whether it's through the Corona Police Community Partnership, whether it's through the multiple organizations, community-based and faith-based with Kids and Cops, and we go on, Run with the Cop, we can go on and on. The community is engaged with the department, and the department is engaged with the community. I am here to tell you that is my priority, to continue that standard that these gentlemen and those men and women sitting in the audience have set. I hold Corona Police Department to be the gold standard in policing, not just in the Riverside area, but in the region. And that means I don't want Corona to measure itself with how we do policing against other departments. I want other departments to look at Corona Police Department and ask, how did they do that? And that is done on each and every call. When we treat each call as if our entire reputation matters on that single call for service, then we've got it right. And that's what I see is happening now, and that's what I want to promise to you that I will continue to push to our people and to challenge them with. So thanks for the welcome. I hope that suffices Mr. Madory, and it wasn't a bushwhack.
Did we put you to work on your first day?
I'm sorry?
Did you put you to work on your first day?
No.
Well, first, did you have a little excitement in the first few days, or?
Every day is exciting.
Wasn't there a carjacking or something that was at the car wash?
Oh, yeah. So that was before I was hired.
Oh, okay, before, yeah. I wanted to make sure he was going to stick around.
The weekend before I was hired, I had already been selected, but hadn't been sworn in. Wanted to get to know the men and women and came out to ride with them. Technically, it could be considered a carjacked car taken from a car wash. With the partner I was with, Sergeant Griffiths, we found the vehicle, made the stop, and as the subject was reaching under his seat at the stop, and I thought, this is how my career in Corona is going to start. So captain at La Habra, I might not make it to my swearing in if this guy comes out with a gun. And it was a tense few moments, but again, just a tremendous response by the men and women in the field. They treated him professionally, they did it safely, they took him into custody. I think it was within about 45 minutes that stolen car was recovered and returned to the owner. So just phenomenal work that your police department is doing.
I love that story. I think it's fantastic. We set something up to test him before he came in. Good job. First, I'd like to everybody give a round of applause for our audience. Thank you all for making time, and truly, you guys have made Corona a safe place today because of your actions over those years. And again, thank you so much. So that kind of ends our program this morning, and I also, before you leave, I want to make sure that you know that we have every year we do a vintage home tour. This year it will be May 11th. Tickets will go on sale soon, and we are also having our second annual vintage home tour kickoff gala, which will be at Heritage Park on May the 10th. Again, thank you very much for coming, and please enjoy the rest of your day.
Is anyone from Corona PD, former or current, who would like to have lunch? We're going to Rodrigo's afterwards. You're welcome.
You going?